All right. So, yeah, keep that in mind. And if you didn't get one of these, it has the time from 5 to 8:30 on Thursday and the address for that. And if you just go to the Windsor Town Green, they're having their tree lighting. It's the same night. So, and you can really walk from the town green to the river, Calvary, the river's little fellowship there. And they really, it's a blessing. If you, especially little guys, they love to be around live animals. I don't know if they're going to get a camel this year, but all kinds of fun just to have a live nativity. And if you've never been to one, it's really, really a neat thing. So I encourage you. The church is much bigger than our little fellowship here, so it's one reminder of that. Down in Windsor, it'll be a blessing. So Deuteronomy Chapter 24, as we kind of continue to look at these laws concerning domestic relationships. And there's quite a few things in here to just kind of go over. And a couple kind of smaller chapters here. So I think we're going to try to attack both and kind of take in both and see what we can glean from them. So chapter 24, verse 1, it says, "When a man has taken a wife and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, because he has found some uncleanness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement, and give it in her hand, and send her out of his house. And if you think it's done, it's not done. And she, when she is departed out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife." Verse 3, "And if the latter husband hate her, and write her a bill of divorcement, and give it in her hand, and send her out of his house, or if the latter husband die, which took her to be his wife, her former husband, which sent her away, may not take her again to be his wife, after that she is defiled. For that is abomination before the Lord, and thou shalt not cause the land to sin, which the Lord thy God gives for your inheritance. When a man has taken a new wife, he shall not go out to war. Neither shall he be charged with any business, but he shall be free at home 1 year, and shall cheer up his wife, which he has taken." I like the way that's worded. It's kind of like the wife is like, "What did I get into?" And he has to be there to, "Come on, cheer up, honey. You got me. It's not so bad." And somebody said he's told not to go out to war because his war will be there in the home with his new wife. There's another joke for you, but verse 6, "No man shall take the nether of, or the upper millstone to pledge, for he takes a man's life to pledge. If a man be found stealing any of his brethren or the children of Israel, and makes merchandise out of them, selling them, then that thief shall die, and thou shalt put away evil from among you. Take heed in the plague of leprosy, that thou observe diligently, and do according to all that the priests, the Levites, shall teach you. As I commanded them, so ye shall observe to do. Remember what the Lord thy God did unto Miriam by the way after that ye were come out of Egypt. When thou dost lend thy brother anything, thou shalt not go into his house to fetch his pledge, or hold anything hostage." That's kind of the idea there. "Thou shalt stand abroad, and the man to whom thou dost lend shall bring out the pledge abroad unto thee. And if the man be poor, thou shalt not sleep with his pledge. In any case, thou shalt deliver him the pledge again when the sun goes down, that he may sleep in his own raiment or clothing, and bless thee, and it shall be righteousness unto you before the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not oppress an hired servant. that is poor and needy, whether he be of thy brethren or of thy strangers that are in the land with you, within thy gates. At his day thou shalt give him his hire, neither shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor, and sets his heart upon it. Lest he cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee. The fathers shall not be put to death for the children, neither shall the children be put to death for the fathers. Every man shall be put to death for his own sin. You might take note there, the wages of sin is death. And there's a very clear indication each one of us will stand for our own sin. Verse 17, thou shalt not pervert the judgments of the stranger, nor of the fatherless, nor take a widow's raiment or clothing to pledge. But thou shalt remember that thou wert bondman in Egypt, and the Lord thy God redeemed thee thence. Therefore I command thee to do this thing when thou cuttest down thy harvest in the field, and hast forgotten a sheaf in the field. Thou shalt not go again and fetch it. It shall be left there for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all the work of thine hands. When you beat an olive tree, thou shalt not go over the boughs again, and it shall be left there for the stranger, the fatherless, or the widow. When thou gather the grapes of the vineyard, thou shalt not glean it afterward. It shall be left for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow. And thou shalt remember that you were bondmen in the land of Egypt. Therefore I command thee to do this thing. Always keeping in mind the fatherless, the stranger, the widow. God did not set up and really did not make it possible for them to be greedy. That was the whole idea. Don't take everything and strip everything from your trees, your vineyards, from your crop, but take what you get when you glean it and leave the rest. And the story of Ruth and Naomi, once we get to the book of Ruth, we're going to see a reason for that. It's God has a reason for everything that's in the scriptures, but it's important, and kind of the takeaway from the very end of chapter 24 there is not to be greedy, not to be taking more than what you need. And if anyone needs to hear that, America needs to hear that. Take what you need for that day, for that meal, whatever it may be. But back to the controversy of chapter 24. Divorce and remarriage. That's what's being addressed. That's what the Lord is addressing. The religious guys, the religious leaders of Jesus' day, in Matthew chapter 19, if you don't already have that in your margin, in Matthew 19, the first few verses, Jesus was asked by the Pharisees, the religious leaders of his day, why then did Moses command that we get divorced? That's how the Pharisees asked Jesus. Why did Moses command that we get divorced? Do you see the problem? Moses never commanded divorce. In fact, Jesus clears it up, and he says Moses permitted divorce in these cases. And we just read about a couple of them there. But the big controversy, the big fogginess of this is what counts for uncleanness. And there were many schools of thought. One school of thought was extremely legalistic, if you can say that. And they said if your new wife burnt your toast, that was counted for uncleanness. You could say, sorry, we're split up. So they had extreme sides to this. But Jesus says if anyone gets divorced for any reason other than sexual immorality, or uncleanness. If anyone gets divorced for any reason other than that, it is sin, Jesus says. And Jesus, by the way, brings this whole issue of divorce and or remarriage, he brings it back to simplicity. And I love that about our Lord. I love that about the God of the Bible. Because anyone, if you talk to them about their divorce, no matter how long ago it was, no matter how recent it was, no matter what the whole dilemma is, that it's just filled with stories and filled with confusion and filled with lies and filled with this, that, or the other. It's the opposite, if you will, of simplicity. And Jesus, when answering in Matthew chapter 19, you can check it out for yourself, when answering the Pharisees, the religious leaders of his day, Jesus says, it was not so from the beginning. God made Adam and Eve, and they were called husband and wife. It was never an intention, and if you're for them to split up, then get back together, and split up, and then go marry another, and then like Deuteronomy's forbidding here, even if you do that, get married, and then something happens to that, then you expect to come back to your original husband. Sorry, not so. In fact, when the rabbis officiate, I don't know if they still do this today, but one thing they do is they say, my sister, my bride. My sister, my wife. Why did the rabbis emphasize that? That's kind of weird. I wouldn't want to come down the aisle and you're calling your new wife my sister, my bride. What's that all about? You cannot change who your sister is, ever. Nothing will ever change that. And that's the whole purpose of that. Not to mention, she is your sister in Christ. And you're the brother. And so the whole thing about all of that is the permanence of marriage. This was meant for just like your sister. You can't get rid of her. I've tried. Well, I should say she's tried to get rid of me more times. And I can say that because she's not here. Anyway, my wife is to be just that, my sister forever. And and we know, and God knew that stuff was going to come up. And it's going to be drama, it's going to be stories, it's going to be lies, it's going to be all kinds of things that you can get into. And 3 things to take note of, biblical reasons for divorce. We learned later on in 1 Corinthians 7 some more about these issues, but just quickly for us to understand, one of them is this uncleanness that we read about here, sexual immorality. And Jesus said, what God has brought together, let no man put us, tear apart. Well, if there has been sexual immorality and the husband, say, has already slept with another woman that's not his wife, that has already been split. So that has already happened. So understand that. And so that's why one of the biggest and main reasons for this to ever be a biblical reason for divorce is if there has been sex with someone that's not your spouse. And so that's reason number 1. But then there's a couple others that Paul highlights, like I said in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And I'll just tell them to you right up front. If the spouse dies and you become a widow, then you're able to remarry. And then if the spouse, what we would call abandonment, if the spouse just will not answer you, he has left, she has left, and there's no getting a hold of them, they are not, so you have adultery or sexual immorality, reason number 1. Reason number 2, death, if one of the spouses dies. But reason number 3, abandonment. And you better make sure that they've abandoned you, that it's truly that, and you're not just, well, I tried to call him twice, And I say all of that with Malachi chapter 2, verse 16. in mind. And if you don't know what Malachi chapter 2, verse 16 says, turn there and look. It's the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi. Chapter 2, verse 16. It says what God thinks of this whole D word that I don't even like to be said in my house, whether it's my children talking about it, whatever it is. For the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that he hates putting away. Or, the newer translations will tell you, he hates divorce. This whole idea of putting away your wife or divorcing your husband. God absolutely hates it. Malachi 2:16. Like I said, there's reasons for it, but God absolutely hates divorce. No matter what the cause is, no matter what the reason may be. It's something that God permits. It was never something commanded, as the Pharisees came to Jesus and tried to twist even Moses as he wrote it. Why did Moses command that we do this? And Jesus, of course, clarifies things and says, it's a permitting thing. So God, and this is another reason why it's so important for us to really think about who we're going to marry. Don't jump right into it. Don't act like you have to get it done right away. There's never any reason for that. Get to know one another. And give it time. If it's meant to be, nothing will tear you apart. Nothing will come between. See, we read this morning in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5, 6, and 7. Be not wise in your own eyes. Don't do what you think is good for you. Trust in the Lord. Understand, it's going to last. It's going to be, if it's meant to be. The devil, the enemy, he says, you don't have time. Hurry up, hurry up. There's no way. We've got to do this right now. So, divorce and remarriage, not fun issues to talk about, but there you have them. And I love the Lord's heart on all of this, He wants there to be a time where it's just you and your wife. Notice that? When you do get married, don't go out to war. Don't act as if life just continues on as normal, as usual. No. This should be something, and for the Jewish weddings, I think they lasted a week long. When you got married, it was not just a day in a chapel, but it was a week long. This was a big thing. And so that's the emphasis. That's what God's, we just happen to be here in Deuteronomy 24, and this is what God's emphasizing this week. Marriage. It's something to be taken serious, and it's something that we ought not to just throw around and just kind of, I got married, and it's interesting too. We forget that the man was the only one deciding. A woman never decided on who she wanted to marry. Remember that as you're going through this stuff. A woman was never the one saying, I'm going to call the shots. And we've all known, we've all heard the stories of women actually proposing that they get married. It ought not to be. In fact, it's just the way things were back then. And so you had this, if the man put his wife away and then she goes and marries another, the commandment here at the first part was the man is not to say, I can take her back anytime I want. No, God says, you've already did it. She's gone and been another man's wife, and then to have her come back, don't think you can treat her like property. That's the whole idea, because they did back in ancient times. The women, like I said, the women had no say. Some of these cultures, even to this day, that the gospel has never come into, it's the same way today. You're also not to take things from people and hold them over their head. That's what that whole taking things as a pledge. And it's interesting, he brings that up right there at the divorce. You know, holding the wedding ring and saying, you're not going to get this back until I get my money, or whatever it is. Holding something as usury, as a pledge, and saying, I'm going to use this to get my way. That's kind of the idea. God says, don't do things that way. That's like the world. And if there is no divorce, you're never going to get into this anyways. But we're not to be like the world is with all of these things. We're to be righteous, peaceable. Another really, really important verse to highlight here is verse 16 of Deuteronomy 24. I'll read it again. Verse 16 of Deuteronomy 24. It's another touchy subject, but the father shall not be put to death for the children, neither, and you might underline and highlight this, the children are not to be put to death for the father's mistake, the father's sin. Hypothetical here, you know. A man that has children, well, a man that doesn't have children, he goes out and rapes a woman. That woman then, because of his sin, gets pregnant, right? And this is the biggest argument, by the way, for the hot topic of abortion. Because of that man's sin, that baby now, that child now, is put to death. Do you understand that? This is strictly forbidding abortion to ever even be. It's exactly what it was stated. The children are not to be put to death for the father's sin or the mother's sin or for anybody else's sin. That is one of the greatest scriptures, Deuteronomy 24 verse 16, to really use for the whole argument of abortion. Because today in our society it's been accepted, and the biggest excuse, the biggest thing that they'll bring up, what about rape? What about when she's raped? Then she should be aborted, right? Then it should be okay, right? What about incest? What about rape? Whatever it is. Hey, it's sin. And should the child be put to death for the father's sin? That's insanity. But we're insane as a culture. We've lost all sense of truth and righteousness. So I wanted to hammer that point home. And again, the end of chapter 24 is to warn us, to forbid us from being greedy, taking things and keeping things, hoarding things all for ourselves. But chapter 25, if there be a controversy between men, and they come unto judgment, that the judges may judge them, then they shall justify the righteous and condemn the wicked. That should be what's happening in our judicial system. However, it is not. But I love Deuteronomy for the very just straightforward, very simple, stated, this is what should happen. The righteous should be justified and the wickedness should be condemned. But verse 2, it shall be, if the wicked man be worthy to be beaten, that the judge shall cause him to lie down and to be beaten before his face, before the judge's face, according to all his faults. By a certain number, 40 stripes, he may give him and not exceed, lest if he should accept or exceed and beat him above these, the 40 stripes, with many stripes, then thy brother should seem vile or wicked unto thee. It's considered abuse, anything after 40 stripes. Thou shalt not muzzle the ox when he treads out the corn. 1 Corinthians 9:9 should be right next to verse 4 of Deuteronomy 25. In other words, the worker is worthy of the wages. But this whole thing with beatings, I really believe, and they really were more effective than what we call correction and penitentiaries, prison, jail. You talk about inhumane, you talk about vile, you talk about nasty. That's so much worse. To be put in a prison cell for 80 years. Put in a prison cell that is so much more severe than it needs to be for smoking a joint somewhere. Or holding a bunch of drugs or whatever. If you were to know that you were going to be beaten, I really do believe it would be more effective to change that person from being a drug dealer, from being whatever it was. But in the penitentiary, in the prison cell, jail, all of those, oftentimes, we've seen it. It really doesn't make a difference. And talk about causing the families of the victims to just go more insane when you know that's what's happening. But again, it was not so with what God had with those that were wicked and those that were righteous here. This was what happened. And of course, Jesus Christ himself was beaten 39 stripes, and he was beaten to a pulp, and that was for my wickedness, for your wickedness. And so, again, a glimpse of Jesus Christ here in Deuteronomy 25. Verse 5 goes on, if brethren war with one another, they're out wrestling. We've all seen this. And one of them dies and has no children, the wife of the dead man shall not marry without or outside the family unto a stranger. Her husband's brother is the one that should marry her. Go in unto her and take her to him to wife, and perform the duty of an husband's brother unto her. And it shall be that the firstborn which she bears shall succeed in the name of his brother which is dead, that his name be not put out of Israel. So again, speaking of really the honor of the dead brother, and again, making family very important here. One thing that you might note is the brothers now, the sisters, the family, the cousins, whatever it is, are much more involved, if you will. They're much more interested in, are you really going to marry that person? Is it really going to be that person? Because now, if you die or something's ever going to happen, you've got a big responsibility. So the brother's a little more curious, a little more interested now. And so it's getting kind of, and I really believe that's God's heart, that we should be, as a family unit, involved and kind of talking about these things, thinking about them a little more, and being more careful about who we might marry and all of that. Verse 7 goes on, if the man like not to take his brother's wife, well, the consequence, then let his brother's wife go. She can go free, up to the gates, unto the elders, and say, my husband's brother refuses to take me, and to raise up his brother's honor, a name in Israel, he will not perform the duty of mine husband's brother. Well, then the elder of that city shall call him and speak unto him, and if he stand to it and say, I do not like to take this woman to be my wife, then shall his brother's wife come and unto him in the presence of all the elders, and loose his shoe from off his foot, and spit in his face. There you have it, gals. You like that? Take his shoe off and spit in his face. And shall answer unto him, so it shall be done unto you, that man that will not build up his brother's house or honor his brother, and his name shall be called shoeless in Israel. That's the whole idea there. The house of him that has his shoe loosed. And that whole thing, we don't quite understand it in our culture, but that was an insult. One of the highest insults was to take the shoe off and throw it, spit in the face. Ruth, in the book of Ruth, this becomes a little more emphasized, and Ruth was a widow. She had been married, and whoever she was married to had died. And the kinsman, the closest family member, was to come and be her bride. And Boaz was the one that was meant to be, but he honored this very thing and gave the relative a chance to come and be Ruth's bride, Ruth's husband, before he would. But we'll get to that later in the book of Ruth. But ultimately, remember that Jesus had his shoe ripped off, and his face was spit in, literally, on the cross. Why? So that he could take you to be his bride. Pretty heavy stuff here, when you really see what had to be done, because the world, they just take some and then just use you and then cast you aside. And if you know, that's what Egypt did to all they were in bondage and slavery. They were not a good husband, if you will. And God, the perfect husband, comes along and sees you as his bride. And so we've all been from lover to lover to lover to lover, and it's left you empty, it's left you wanting, it's left you just hopeless, depressed. Come to him. Come to the perfect husband, Jesus Christ. He's done everything. He's taken all of the beatings that there is. Well, when men strive together, this is my favorite verse in all the Bible. When men strive together, one with another, they're wrestling, and the wife of the one draws near to deliver her own husband out of her hand, out of the guy's hand. It's getting pretty intense, this wrestling match, and the wife wants to rescue her husband out of the hand of him that smites him, and puts forth her hand and takes him by the secrets. Thou shalt now cut off her hand. Your eye shall not pity her. Isn't that cool? Did you guys just love it? I love the Bible. I love the Bible. It gives you a very, very clear picture there of what, and two guys are out wrestling, and the wife wants to come to the rescue of her husband and be the hero. And it's not to be so. That's what God's saying. In fact, he takes it so seriously, if she grabs him by the privates, the secrets as it's called, she's to have her hand cut off. So it's very, the Lord sees these things as very sacred. We might see them as a wrestling match. Oh, it's just no big deal. No, and it's a lot like, when you're a parent, especially a new parent, you're concerned about every little thing. But then you get to be a parent of more than a few kids, and all of a sudden she's got everything on the floor is in her mouth. I hear about these kids and families. But that's what the Lord stays interested in every detail, and he says there's a reason, there's a purpose for all of it. Nothing just happens out of the ordinary. And I have a very specific thing. And the whole thing there is, don't even think about it. Just let it be. They'll figure it out. One of them might die, but stay out of it. That's the whole thing here. Don't get involved, and don't be overly involved where you yourself are putting your hand where it ought not to be. All right, moving on. Verse 13, thou shalt not have in your bag diverse weights, a great and small. Thou shalt not have in thine house diverse measures, great and small. But thou shalt have perfect and just weights, a perfect and just measure shalt thou have, all that thy days may be lengthened in the land with which the Lord thy God gives you. For all that do such things, and all that do unrighteously, are an abomination unto the Lord thy God. Remember what Amalek did unto thee, by the way, when you were come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way, and he smote thee on the back, in the hindmost, that is, those that were in the back of the group, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God has given thee rest from all your enemies round about, in the land which the Lord thy God gives thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Thou shalt not forget it. And that whole last little section is, well, the just waits too. Don't be, I guess the word would be manipulating. That's the word. Don't be manipulating people in business, in relationships, just to get them to do what you want them to do. God is laying out everything perfectly here. And we're to be honest and just people. Men and women of our word. Not playing around, not pushing the finger down on the scale to make it seem like more so that you can get more money for whatever it is. We're not to cheat people. People that are that way, people that have gone through life cheating, gone through all of this kind of stuff, cheating their way through life, they become lazy. Everything's handed to them. They no longer have a drive, really. They don't need to. They've manipulated everyone and everything to just do what they want it to do. That's that whole idea of just waits, diverse waits. Don't fall into that trap. It's very easy. The enemy knows the kind of people we are. But you become lazy and you start to get like they were when Amalek came and attacked from the back. See, the children of Israel were marching through and leaving Egypt, but they were in a huge group. And if you were enthusiastic, if you were all about it, you wanted to get out of there, you were kind of in the middle of the group or near the front. But if you were kind of just into your own stuff and maybe even missing Egypt a little bit, which we know many of them did once we get to Numbers, you're kind of thinking about, oh, my collection that I had, my bug collection for the little guys, my camel collection that I had. I had a great thing going in Egypt, and now I have to leave it. And they're kind of lagging behind as they go. What happened? The enemy picked them off. And it happens. We are in a very real battle. And there's times where we just kind of lag behind. I don't mean to pick on the guys in the back row today, but you're going to get picked off by the enemy. And it doesn't matter where you sit in church, but in the war of life, that is the battle that rages, don't be lagging behind and just holding up. Others too will be affected by you lagging behind, or you're just kind of, I'm not so sure about this going to Egypt thing. I don't know, or leaving Egypt and going into the wilderness. I don't know about this whole thing. And you find yourself doubting. You will be taken down by the enemy, and it will be brutal. That's what happened, and that's what God's referring to. In fact, it was C.S. Lewis that said, the primary task of any good teacher is not to give you great revelations or reveal new things, but just as Moses is doing, just as God's doing through Moses here, remember what happened to those that got taken down by Amalek and wiped out. Remember Miriam earlier in chapter 24 and what happened to her with leprosy. All that pride and everything that did. Numbers chapter 12 is that whole story of Miriam getting leprosy. And what a terrible thing that was. God's saying, and the whole book of Deuteronomy is remember. And that's what C.S. Lewis says. The task of any great teacher is not to reveal such new mysteries and all of that, but to really remember and call to remembrance. Provoking you. That's what I desire to do. That's what the Word of God does. It provokes, and it should make us and cause us to ask things like, what has God done in my life? Could I tell others all that God has done in my own life? Do I remember how God has brought me out of this, that, or the other? Can I really boast in what the Lord has done all those years ago, whatever it is? And it's important that we don't find ourselves lagging behind or being wise in our own eyes or thinking that we did it somehow. That's the danger of many worldly programs and things, is so often it's you did it. So you get a chip, you get a badge, you get this, that, or the other. Look at what you've done. No, we're to be those, and really the Bible is full of those who say, look what the Lord has done. Look what God has done in my life. He gets the glory, not me. And I meant to touch on this at the end of chapter 24. I just saw it in my notes, but it is important, especially during Christmas time. I think this doesn't get brought up enough. But remember how they weren't to take everything on the vine. They were to leave things for the stranger. One thing that we should highlight there is the fatherless, the widow. Ruth, even in the story, is working very hard to get that food that was left behind. God was never, and never did, God never started soup kitchens. That was not God that decided to open up and come on and get it while it's hot. God's desire is not to just hand out free food. No. In fact, those signs will work for food. That's a godly idea if they would ever do it. Work to get that's left over on the vine. And it's a lot of work. You've got to go out and really glean and see what's a blueberry and what's rabbit poop. You've got to really get out there and see and take and separate, right? And work. Again, not a popular message, because we're so used, and our whole nation is full of entitlement. That belongs to me. I've been coming to this soup kitchen for years. It's mine. Really? What have you done to earn it? The Bible is full of these kinds of things. And we need to be refreshed by that, especially during this season. It's not about gifts. It's not about money. It's not about the biggest gift, the greatest surprise we could ever pull off. It's not about any of that, is it? It's fully about, and we sang the first song that we sang, bring us back to Him. Bring us back to Him. And I will sing that song every week during this season, because what happens? We start being drawn over to this supermarket, this mall, this whatever it is. And we start seeing flashy things. We're like fish, man. We go right after it, we'll get hooked and caught, and then they bring us in, they gut us, take us for all our worth, and then throw us back in. But you come to Him, you understand it's all about Him. It really is. Marry Christ X. Throw Xmas out of your vocabulary and start saying it. Marry Christ X. Because seriously, it's all about Him. It is all about Him, isn't it? Well, Father, we thank you. Thank you for your word this morning. Thank you for the powerful things, the illustrations, the lessons that we can take away, Lord. I pray that we would not grow weary in doing good. We would not get lazy or lag behind, Lord, but that you would quicken us, wake us up, and cause us to be effective in the Lord's army. That we would be soldiers, warriors, fighting battle faithfully, and doing your work, your service in the Lord's army. I thank you so much for this time. And if you're here this morning and the Lord's wrestling with you over any of these things that might have been brought up, please stay and pray. please come forward and pray. Hang out. We got plenty of time. You're not in a hurry. Nowhere to be. But I encourage you to take time and pray. Just fellowship. For He is Lord. He is Lord. He is risen from the dead, and He is Lord. Every knee shall bow, every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. God bless.